Okay, we can start. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jill Gigstad, and I am the Communications Specialist with the Indiana, Illinois, Iowa Foundation for Fair Contracting. We're excited to co-host this important conversation about the many benefits of hiring a local workforce on public construction projects. From strengthening our communities to boosting economic growth and ensuring quality work, there's a lot to gain when we invest in our local workforce. We have a great lineup of speakers today who will share their experiences, the economic impact, and the legal aspect of hiring locally. As we go through the presentation, we ask that you please ask questions, add them to the Q&A box at the bottom or the chat box, and we'll make sure to address them at the end during our Q&A session. We're hoping that we make good time, but we may go a little long, so we'll be willing to stay for the Q&A, and we also are going to record this. Thanks again for being here, and let's get started. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. And perfect. Okay. Everyone can see this? You guys are good?
Yep.
Perfect. Sorry. Okay, perfect. So just a brief synopsis of the III FFC. We are a nonprofit labor management organization that was founded in 1999. We were created to balance the interests of both business and labor and advocate for public policies that reward work, ensure business growth, and ensure broad-based prosperity. We raise standards of responsibility in the construction industry. This is just a picture of our jurisdiction. We cover parts of Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa, hence our name. The Midwest Economic Policy Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization that was founded in 2013 to deliver research and expert analysis on public policy issues impacting businesses, working families, and taxpayers. Now to introduce our great speakers today. First up, we have Frank Lucchese. He is a construction analyst in Indiana for the III FFC. Prior to joining FFC, he served as an Elkhart County Commissioner for 16 years. Next, we have Frank Manzo IV. He's an economist with MEPI, and he previously worked at the University of Illinois Labor Education Program and in the Federal Reserve System. He earned a Master of Public Policy from the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Political Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and an Advanced Certificate of Labor Studies from the University of Illinois Labor Education Program. And finally, we have Melissa Binetti. She's counsel with the III FFC. She joined our staff in 2007, and she obtained her law degree and a certificate in labor and employment law from Chicago-Kent College of Law in 2004. So now I am going to kick it on over to Frank Lucchese.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me get my screen. Pull that up again. Get it shared. Good. You seeing it?
Yep.
And having the one issue again where I don't see it. But let me give you 1 second here. Let me see if we can get this back up. Yeah. There we go. All right. So let's get started. Thank you, Jill. We have viewers on this session who are from throughout Indiana, Illinois, maybe some from even Iowa. So when we talk about our local workforce, we're looking about the county versus county or state versus state workforce. We're talking about workforce of your geographic area. I say that because in Indiana and Illinois, contractors just across the state line would work for cities like Hammond, East Chicago, Gary. There are Michigan contractors that work in South Bend market. Wisconsin and Iowa contractors cross over into Illinois, vice versa. So the simplest way to describe is that we are talking about contractors from within a general radius around our communities, and you know from experience how large or small the general radius is. Now, an out of county or out of state contractor is not necessarily a bad thing, but there can be some red flags associated with that when you look for and when you talk about that, shortly here. So one of the biggest pros of the public policy is that when you're utilizing local workforce, you probably already know who you're dealing with. If you're a county commissioner, mayor, building inspector, you'll learn very quickly who your contractors are and if they are reputable or not. You know from experience, good or bad, that contractors are capable of. But when you start to get contractors bidding on your projects, you are unknown to you or not from your general area, there could be some reasons they are coming to your community and could even be at risk to your budgets or even your residents. First, in general, most contractors work specifically in the industry. Some contractors' forte may be road work, while other companies solely do water and infrastructure work. Other contractors may perform building and new construction, while landscape companies do landscaping and so on. In normal practices, road work contractors won't be bidding to bid on a new library. Landscape companies will be bidding to build bridges. Dredging companies won't be bidding to construct new water towers and so on. Contractors generally have their specialty, and you want the ones who are qualified for your specific projects. So what about when an unknown out of state contractor shows up to bid on your projects? Who are from far beyond your radius and are underbidding everyone in your area? That could be red flags when they're underbidding you. So we could find local companies who are often very competitive when bidding each other. Multi-million-dollar bids may all only have a percentage point or less between the companies. And when you have a consensus bids, the contractors, union or non-union, and a company from out of the area showing underbids everyone by an exorbitant amount, this could be caused by inaccurate costs or estimates. The contractors cutting corners or lacking the experience or expertise to estimate or manage or even the project. The lowest bidder is not always the most responsive or responsible bidder. And because of the ongoing market share, analysts that, like Jill mentioned earlier, we see trends in the construction industry that may otherwise go unnoticed by your local community. Here's an actual bid tabulation from a project. You can see that the second, third, and fourth contractors are very competitive with their bids. There's only about $80,000 difference between the second and third contractors. Yet the lowest bidder is actually $1.4 million lower than the second bidder. Why is that? We have to dive deeper into why this is. So let's look at the contractor's activity. These green pins represent every public project this contractor bid on. And if you put a circumference around the activity, it is safe to say he's in the Chicago market. He's bidding in Chicago, Naperville, Joliet, Hoffman Estates, and so on. And if you look at these projects that he was awarded, he was awarded 44 of these projects in this market. But when you notice that the contractors left his market and started a bid on Indiana projects, why is that? From our analysts, we know that the years of 2023, 2024, there was over $12 billion spent on publicly funded construction projects for those 21 counties in Illinois. So it wasn't because there was no work to be funded. So we started looking into potential red flags. This contractor bids on everything from maintenance shops, interior models, to install AstroTurf on ball fields, exterior windows replacements, large water infrastructure projects, and so on. Remember what we said earlier about wanting specialty contractors. if you're going to be building a large infrastructure project or a sewer treatment plant, you don't want someone who's actually installing exterior windows do the work. Through our market share analysts, we've identified over 13 locations where these contractors have been. We're actually going to show you, I'm not going to read them all for you, but there's actually 18 different violations on these 13 locations that actually reinforces the contractor's vetting during your bid process. I'll just read a couple of them, but Illinois Department of Labor violated prevailing wage act under over 20, didn't pay their workers under $20,000 extra. Another one is the district of Franklin Park assessed 37,500 liquidated damages for being 75 days late, and so on. Like I said, there's 18 different violations in this from this company in just these projects. I'll just flip through them real quick. I don't know if you really want to read them or not. And private sector developers and contractors may also have negative consequences for your community if allowed to go unchecked. Many private developers can be money market investment firms with no ties or no real vested interest in your local communities. Let me just get through the last of these different violations. Like I said, there's 18 of them, so you get through them all. There we go. And will these new companies will they be following your local laws? This was a large private solar development where workers from across the U.S. converged into rural Indiana County. They came from all over from California, Texas, Arizona, Florida, and many other states. The developer brought in used school buses from the East Coast for driving the workers to and from these job sites. These buses violated the state's federal motor carrier law, resulting in fines. Buses were impounded, and rather than getting the buses out of impound and properly plate them, the owners abandoned most of them and left them for the towing company to deal with. Many can be limited liability companies, which owners, investors are hidden from the public record when these unknown developers bring the unknown out of the area and out of state workforce to your community. They can bring you and your citizens problems. Are they capable? Is it a capable workforce? Here's a photo of a machine that is actually tilted at least 3 feet off the ground. It stands in front of these on the front tires because the improper loading operation of and the only thing stopping the actual forklift from falling over, which you don't see in the whole picture, it's leaning against a building. It came to rest against that building. Are they safely operating the machinery on the job sites? The machine was being driven around and used at a job site for days in this condition. And if there are any county highway folks or farmers or on today's session, you don't operate heavy equipment like this on only 3 wheels. Yeah, and will they respect your community? This is how those same workers treated Marcy, my counterpart. Marcy would be standing on a public sidewalk across the street, sometimes at least 30 yards away, and because they did not like her photographing the obvious OSHA violations, they would rather give her the finger than just focus on doing their jobs. And this worker was one of the worst. Every day he would cuss and yell obscenities at Marcy, and it did not matter that she was a downtown setting, busy sidewalks, people shopping, jogging, etc. The ugly. Your communities will be exposed to consequences of an unknown nomad workforce. This is actually a probable cause affidavit where a worker from Florida was criminally charged with sexual battery against a female minor who was simply working with her job at a restaurant. These are just some examples of the importance of why a thorough vetting process is necessary to protect your community and your tax dollars, which Melissa Binetti will be speaking shortly about. I'm going to, in closing, as a local official, you have the final say and control who will benefit most from your large development. You can ensure that the majority who will be benefiting your local workforce, communities, and businesses, out-of-state workforce. I'm going to play a quick video, and after that, we'll hand this off to Frank Manzo. But this is a quick video about that. So it just takes
Building a solar farm is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for local construction workers. Solar farm developers may downplay the importance of hiring local workers because they intend to employ a traveling workforce from across the country rather than hiring locally. And what do those out-of-state workers do with the income from those Indiana jobs? Every payday, wages from the Indiana jobs are direct deposited to out-of-state banks, where those local communities will reap the financial benefit. This is the story of the Dunn's Bridge Solar Project, a 700 megawatt development where the general contractor chose to hire local Indiana workers.
It's been the best job I've had so far. It's given me a long-term job and the most money I've made on any job I've ever worked at. I've been working 6 11-hour days over a year.
North Liberty, Indiana, which is about an hour west of here. So it's been a little bit over 14 months that I've been on this project. The project's 5,000 acres. It's been year-round work, 10 hours, 6, 7 days a week.
This is definitely the biggest job with the most trades that I've been on. It allowed me to make a lot of money, able to go to doctor's appointments and able to do those things with being so close to home. It's definitely benefited my family full-fledged, and obviously the surrounding communities.
I live in Westville, Indiana. I've been there my whole life. At one point, just with Black and Beach, we have 200 operators here. There's a total of 900 tradesmen out here. It's been a good job for this area and all the workers. The dirt works first, they come in, put roads in, put the drainage in, a lot of site work, piling crews come in and put all the piling that's going to support all the other material.
90 apprentices have worked on this project, gaining invaluable training that can be used over the rest of their careers as tradesmen.
Got sent out here for my first job. I've learned a lot about solar being out here and a lot of different equipment. So there's a lot of specialized equipment out here, and I've got to run a little bit of everything. So I've been learning a lot. I grew up in Counsel. I got married in May, and I just bought a house all winter long. We've been doing 6, 10, occasionally Sundays.
I grew up in the Twin City, Indiana. I've been there my whole entire life. I started this project January 25th, 2024.
My whole family comes from Michigan City. I was born and raised here. I've been over a year. It keeps the economy going and everything, and it helps out for everybody. Not just all for men. There's women out here too as well. It's like one of the biggest jobs I've ever been on.
Every day for a year now, hundreds of area workers have been driving home to their families. These are Indiana homeowners, taxpayers, and voters. These are local workers with a vested interest in their communities. They have family in the area, children in local schools, and they support local businesses. They buy their vehicles locally, spend their money locally, and support their communities. Black and Beach has paid over $250 million in wages and benefits to Hoosier workers.
All right, thank you. I have done the end of my part, and if go ahead and cancel my screen. Thank you, Jill. Head of it. So I want to thank everyone for attending today, and we'll pass on to Frank Manzo.
Frank, you're muted.
Yeah, I realize that. Sorry about that. Thank you. It has come to my attention that even the dogs don't like it when you hire non-local contractors and non-local workers. So that's another reason to do it. I'm here today to talk about the economics of hiring local. So good morning, everyone. As Jill and the other Frank both mentioned, I'm Frank Manzo, and I've been at the Midwest Economic Policy Institute for 12 years. We are affiliated with the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, so you'll see both MEPI and LEPI on these slides here. Both are nonprofit research organizations that promote economic growth for businesses and working families, but we do specialize in the construction industry. We are excited to co-host this webinar with the III FFC. In my decade plus, I've authored or co-authored dozens and dozens of reports on everything from registered apprenticeships to prevailing wage laws and the federal Davis-Bacon Act, all the way to responsible bidder ordinances and local hiring. And we're going to talk about all of that here today. Billions of dollars are being invested in roads and bridges and energy systems, manufacturing facilities, data centers, other infrastructure projects in both Illinois and Indiana. Those are kind of the two states I'm mostly highlighting here today, although there are others. Right over here, I mean, we've seen a threefold increase in the construction spending on manufacturing projects in the last 5 years. This is nationally, but our region, which is Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, that region is leading the way. And these are historic investments that can improve our competitiveness and grow our state economies while creating thousands of good-paying jobs, as basically as Frank has mentioned. But taxpayers only get the best bang for their buck if they are built by local construction businesses who employ skilled local workers. And the reason, as mentioned, is that when local contractors and workers build the projects, they spend those dollars back at restaurants and stores and so on in their own communities. And that boosts the regional economy. And economists refer to this as the multiplier effect that creates jobs and adds to the tax base. So this slide, there's a lot here, but this is basically the opposite example of the Dunsbridge solar project video that you just saw. It's two recent solar installation projects up in Wisconsin. And I see you, Cindy, on here from Wisconsin. I saw you there. So she may even have more familiarity with this. But the first project over here is built almost entirely with a non-local workforce, while the second was built locally. They're both basically the same size, 150 megawatts. But the first project only created about 200 local jobs, while the second created nearly 600. And because all of those jobs were local, all of the income earned by the local workers went back into the community, versus only a fraction for the non-local workers. And that meant that hiring local had a much larger impact on economic activity. And it was to the tune of $90 million difference in economic activity. That also translates into a big differential in the multiplier per dollar investment, a 28% difference. We also have more tax revenues remaining in the state as well. I do want to note that these are 150 megawatt projects, so these are smaller than the Dunsbridge solar project in Indiana. So the impact of the Indiana project is much larger than what you see here. Here's another example. This is research actually from Pennsylvania, but I want to note that Pennsylvania is basically the same size as Illinois by population and workforce. So those of you on this webinar from Illinois, these numbers generally apply to the state of Illinois. In any case, the research from Pennsylvania showed that for every 10% increase in the share of transportation projects that was awarded to in-state contractors, every 10% increase boosts the state's economy by over $1 billion a year. It created thousands of jobs, it increased state and local tax revenues by millions of dollars, and it raised apprenticeship investments by another $9 million annually. The takeaway is that economic development is maximized when projects hire locally. Now, I do want to kind of hone in on that last part about registered apprenticeship training, because it is key. Because let's just say you're paving a state road, and again, focusing on Illinois and Indiana, IDOT or INDOT uses your tax dollars on the lowest bidder, but that low bidder, for whatever reason, is from Texas, and they're bringing in a low-wage migratory workforce. Okay, what do you think the odds are that they're going to be contributing to the operating engineer's local 150 apprenticeship fund? or to local laborers training programs. Okay, leveling with you, the answer is zero. They're not contributing to those apprenticeship funds. There's actually pretty low odds they're even contributing to any apprenticeship funds at all. Usually they're pocketing that money, but if they are contributing to apprenticeship funds, it's going to be the programs back home in Texas. On the other hand, if you bring on local contractors, they not only put that money in for every hour worked by their employees on a per hour basis. Sorry about that. They also are hiring registered apprentices from the area and from the state. So you're not only investing in the next generation of skilled tradespeople in Earn While You Learn programs, you're expanding career opportunities and you're combating labor shortages, all in these gold standard programs that end up paying $30, $40, often $50 an hour upon completion. Now I'll get to this next slide, which is if you want infrastructure completed safely with well-trained workers, the data is very clear in our area and actually across the country, but that our union tradespeople are your best bet. So in Indiana, the union work sites have 64% fewer health and safety violations than non-union workers. And over in Illinois, it's 52% fewer. And the reason we bring that up is that typically when non-local firms temporarily come to town, they're often and usually bringing in a non-union workforce. So you're usually getting this number. Union work sites are safer in these states. So the question then becomes, how do we ensure more projects hire local contractors and workers, right? There are many policies that could be considered, and today I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. The first is responsible bidder ordinances. The second, prevailing wage laws. And the third, local business preference programs. So I'll go ahead and dive right in. Responsible bidder ordinances, or RBOs. RBOs establish minimum standards on public works projects. They are based on objective and verifiable criteria and ensure that taxpayer-funded projects are not awarded to contractors who cut corners or have poor track records. They're essentially protection plans for taxpayers. And research shows that these policies strengthen apprenticeship programs, encourage greater bid competition because your local contractors are now confident that they won't be undercut by fly-by-night guys from out of state. And as a result, because there's more competition, they have no effect on overall project costs. More competition drives down the price. But the research then shows that it increases the market share for local contractors who have knowledge of and connections to the area. So more work for local contractors. And you're going to hear a lot more about RBOs in Melissa's presentation next, so I'll kind of move on from this. But there's, over 100 in Illinois, more than I think 70 in Indiana. But there's a lot of room for growth there. That still more communities, more government bodies, more utilities could adopt this criteria. The next public policy would be prevailing wage. Prevailing wages are local minimum wages for different types of skilled construction workers on taxpayer-funded and ratepayer-funded projects, and they're based on what workers actually earn in a community. Research shows that prevailing wage laws create a level playing field for contractors, and they do that by ensuring that our taxpayer dollars or ratepayer dollars reflect local standards of compensation and craftsmanship. The federal prevailing wage law, which is called the Davis-Bacon Act, reduces the share of projects going to out-of-state contractors by 8%. And that was the intent of the federal Davis-Bacon Act, was to increase work for local contractors. And it's having that effect, an 8% difference. And I'll note that similar results have been found for state level prevailing wage laws across the country. And Montana's law, interestingly, even has a requirement that at least half of all workers employed on public projects be in-state residents. So if you have Yeah, state project, half the workers at least have to be from Montana in that state. But the point here is this: prevailing wage keeps more tax dollars, more income, more spending in the area where a project is being built. Now, again, in these two states that I'm kind of highlighting, Illinois has a prevailing wage law. Indiana repealed its common construction wage, is what it was called, back in 2015. Let's talk about that just for a quick second. After Indiana repealed its law, construction worker earnings fell. They fell by about 8%. And Ed Soliday, who was then the assistant Republican leader in the Indiana House of Representatives, admitted that, quote, "We got rid of prevailing wage, and so far, it hasn't saved us a penny," end quote. It is worth noting that Michigan tried this experiment too and decided that it had had enough. It didn't save any of the money that was promised. Construction wages were down as well, all while more out-of-state contractors were coming in and taking the work. So they brought back their prevailing wage law last February. So Indiana may want to strongly consider doing the same thing that the neighbors to the north have done. Finally, mention local business preference programs, excuse me. These programs can support local contractors and prevent high unemployment. There's many different variations of these things, but what they do is they provide bid credits to local contractors who are seeking to win public works projects. And again, the type of credit and how big the credit is ranges, but I'm giving one example here. Commonly see some cities have 5% bid credits for those with business addresses within the city or business addresses within the state. So if an out-of-state contractor underbids a local contractor by 1% on the project, and the bid credit is 5%, then the local contractor's bid is received as if it had been submitted for 5% less than the original amount. So in this example on the screen, it goes from $100,000 down to $95,000, and it beats out that $99K submission. And as a result, the local business is awarded the project. And that helps to ensure workers from the community are building and repairing the infrastructure that's happening in their backyards. These policies have demonstrated success across the country, and again, could be enacted in more areas across the Midwest, quite frankly. So I'll just sum up by saying that the research on this is quite clear. Hiring local boosts consumer demand and strengthens the economy. It expands apprenticeship training and improves worksite safety and promotes ladders into the middle class for workers from Indiana, Illinois, across America. By enacting more responsible bidder ordinances, bolstering and reintroducing prevailing wage standards, and adding bid credits, we can ensure that our infrastructure is built locally with highly trained workers. I want to thank you all for your time here this morning. Here is my organization's information on the screen, and I believe these PowerPoints will be made available, or even this presentation will be made available via YouTube. I am happy to field questions at the end, but before we do that, I am going to turn it over to Melissa Binetti, who is counsel at the Indiana, Illinois, Iowa Foundation for Fair Contracting. So, Melissa, I'm going to let you take it away. Thanks, everybody.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank our participants and everyone speaking today. I'm going to be discussing responsible bidder ordinances as a way to promote local hiring in your community. Often when we talk about local hire requirements, we think about local preference laws, which Frank Manzo just mentioned a little bit. Often a local preference law will include a bid credit or residency requirements. Those are not the focus of today's presentation, though I will mention a few preference laws towards the end of the presentation. Today, I'm going to be discussing responsible bidder ordinances on public construction projects, as well as what we refer to as responsible business practice ordinances on projects receiving economic incentives. So I think many of the participants here today are familiar with the requirement in public works construction that a public work contract is to be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. When we talk about responsive, we're looking at the bidder meeting the requirements in the bid specifications. Are they providing the materials requested, the scope of work requested, the timeline requested? And when it comes to responsible, there's broader considerations in terms of the contractor's experience, reputation, and resources to complete the project. Public bodies have broad discretion in determining whether or not a bidder is responsible, so long as they don't make a determination based on fraud, favoritism, or unfair dealing. And so with a responsible bidder ordinance, we think that provides public bodies the criteria and objective criteria to make those determinations without fraud, favoritism, or unfair dealing. We're going to go through the criteria today, and you'll see that they're very black and white, yes and no items. Does a contractor comply, yes or no, in order to be eligible to bid on the project? We think responsible bidder ordinances are important for communities because they help ensure a project is completed on time and on budget. They're focused on the contractor's experience, workforce skill, providing safety, as well as training. We think as a result, this discourages non-responsible contractors from bidding when they're aware of the public body's priority in ensuring that contractors who bid are going to meet this criteria to be determined a responsible bidder. And we think non-local contractors then have less incentive to mobilize and bid if they're unable to cut corners and underbid local standards because they know public bodies have these priorities in ensuring responsible contractors on the project. A lot of the focus today is on Indiana, but the criteria that I'll be discussing is very similar and in some cases identical to what we have in our Illinois ordinances as well. There's a few reasons that we focus on RBOs in Indiana. Of note, there was a preference law, state preference law, for about a year. It was repealed in 2012. My recollection at the time is that there was concern in the construction industry about how to apply the term local Indiana business in the ordinance. There was confusion and concern that public bodies might have different standards in applying that, and then possible confusion for contractors and whether or not that would be applied consistently across public bodies. Again, my recollection, I don't have specifics on why it was repealed. We also have, as Frank mentioned, common construction wage, the state prevailing wage law that was repealed in 2015. As Frank mentioned, and as anyone who's attended a federal Davis-Bacon conference talking about federal prevailing wage, when the Davis-Bacon Act was enacted, one of the sponsors was Representative Bacon, who made it very clear that the goal of the prevailing wage law was to protect communities and workers from non-local contractors underbidding local wages. Again, that idea that there's a level playing field created when it comes to that labor standard. And I also think it's important for folks to know that in Indiana, in our earliest version of the responsible bidder ordinance, it was very much a labor management initiative. And while there have been changes over the years, substantively, the majority of the ordinance is the same. We worked with contractors in drafting a sample ordinance that had criteria that responsible contractors could meet, that it wouldn't be burdensome for those contractors, and at the same time, then not be burdensome for public bodies to enforce the ordinance. So the criteria that we include in a responsible bidder ordinance is we have a draft that's available online, and we expect public bodies to, work with the ordinance and revise it as is appropriate for their communities. But these are the criteria that we think help ensure responsible contractors are going to be awarded contracts. Very basic, that the contractors register to do business in the state. It's a simple online form. A fee is paid, but it is something that we see is not done, on surprisingly more often than one would think, given how simple it is. In the construction industry, it's not unheard of for a contractor to close up one shop and open another shop. That new company has the same workers, is in the same location, is using the same equipment, and the contractor has done that to avoid liability under its prior company. So we think it's important that contractors share a list of former business names so public bodies can be aware of any concerns with past companies. We think we'd like the contractors to disclose violation of federal, state, and local laws. And this really focuses in particular on safety issues and OSHA violations. Does a contractor have OSHA violations? Are they repeats? Are they the same violation repeatedly? Are they serious or willful violations? Those are important considerations in determining whether or not a bidder is responsible. And then the contractor staffing capabilities. Will they have the staff and the equipment available to start your project and complete the project on time? Another requirement is participation in a U.S. Department of Labor approved training program for each trade performing work on the project, a cement masons program, an operators program, a laborers program. Apprenticeship training is important in terms of training the future workforce for new workers, certainly, but it also provides opportunities for workers who have been in the field for years to increase their skills, whether it's learning new technology, learning different pieces of equipment that can potentially increase their wage. And these training programs also provide OSHA certifications often and focus on that safety component that's so important. And then we ask contractors to provide a copy of the plan of their drug testing program that meets or exceeds state law requirements. An important component of the RBO is that contractors aren't just saying that they do something by signing off. They're actually providing documentation and proof of their compliance. So along those lines, proof of their professional and trade license is required, and any information as to whether those licenses have been revoked in the past 5 years, as well as disclosure of any tax liens or delinquencies in the past 5 years. Another issue in the construction industry is the problem of misclassification of workers as independent contractors. There are certainly legitimate and many legitimate independent contractors in the construction industry, but there's also an incentive for employers to misclassify workers. And by doing so, they're not going to pay payroll taxes. They're not going to cover the individuals under workers' comp insurance or unemployment insurance. So there's a cost saving to the contractor and a significant cost to the worker. In this situation, part of the responsible bidder ordinance is that the contractor disclose whether there are independent contractors working on the project. And then we also are interested in the contractor's experience of projects with similar size and scope of the work. The draft responsible bidder ordinance requires that the contractor notify a public body of changes in the information that's been provided, and public bodies have the ability to request additional information. If there's something they're looking for clarification, then they should certainly reach out to the contractor for that information. And we always encourage public bodies to check the references, especially if there's a concern, reach out to other public officials to see what their experience was if there's a concern with a bid. Again, public bodies have significant discretion in determining whether a contractor is responsive and responsible, and we think the responsible bidder requirements help give that objective criteria in making those determinations. What's interesting is in Indiana, especially back in 2015 with the repeal of common construction wage, The III FFC did a lot of outreach and speaking with public officials and encouraging them to discuss responsible bidder ordinances with their communities. What we're seeing in recent years is that these same public bodies are now interested in expanding responsible bidder requirements to projects that are financed with economic incentives, such as tax abatements or TIFs. And in this case, it's the public bodies taking its initiative on its own to adopt an ordinance or coming to us asking for examples of how to do that. We think that this shows that public bodies are recognizing the value of the ordinances, that they're not administratively burdensome, and that they are effective. And so what we refer to this as a responsible business practice. The criteria is very similar as a responsible bidder ordinance. The difference being with economic incentives, the public body doesn't have a direct contract with the bidders. There's a developer who is submitting an application for the economic incentives, and the developer is going to be hiring the contractors and subcontractors. So the responsible business practice ordinance puts the requirements and expectation in as part of the application process, so the developer knows that in order to move forward with the project, they are going to ensure that there's responsible contractors performing the work. And often this is done by conditioning any issuance of a building permit, so work can't start until that information has been provided to the public body. So a few places in Indiana where we've seen these ordinances have been in Lake County. Hobart back in 2015 reached out to us for language on tax abatements. Cherville passed an ordinance in 2025. We also have ordinances in LaPorte County, as well as Chesterton and Valparaiso in Porter County. So with the last few slides in the presentation, I'd like to give a little bit of context and compare the landscape in Illinois and Iowa. In Illinois, there is a state prevailing wage law. It is broad and covers projects funded, but also financed in whole or in part with bonds, grants, loans, and other public funds. So we have, as Frank mentioned in his presentation, the prevailing wage law in effect here does set that level playing field in terms of local wages for workers in very broadly in Illinois. There's also an Illinois Preference Act, the Employment of Illinois Workers on Public Works Act. However, it's only effective and enforced during periods of excessive unemployment. And that is 2 consecutive months where unemployment exceeds 5%, as reported by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And to my knowledge, for example, it was enforced during COVID and around July of 2020 through April of 2022. But other than that, it hasn't been in effect. And then the Illinois Procurement Code has responsible bidder requirements for state construction contracts. Some of the requirements are similar to what I previously discussed, including businesses being entitled to do business in the state of Illinois. Illinois also has an apprenticeship requirement that bidders participate in USDOL approved apprenticeship programs. And this often gets people's attention, and folks are concerned that this is a union and non-union issue. But USDOL approved programs do not require any affiliation with a union. There are programs that are sponsored as joint labor management programs with contractors and unions sponsoring the program. There's programs that are sponsored by contractor associations, which are typically non-union programs. And the department also approves programs by single employers. And for example, years back, there was an Illinois Department of Transportation contract with a bidder. We were not sure if the bidder participated in an apprenticeship program. It was a paint striping contractor. And in fact, when we researched it, we did see that that contractor had its own USDOL approved apprenticeship program. So there are different opportunities for contractors to participate in these programs. Again, focusing on the importance of workers' development and training. There are over 100 responsible bidder ordinances passed by local public bodies in Illinois, and we are seeing and getting more inquiries about expanding the RBOs to cover different types of projects, such as with TIFs. In Iowa, there's no prevailing wage law. There is a preference law that only is in effect if another state's preference law is in effect, a reciprocal preference law. So if Illinois' preference law is in effect, a bidder in Iowa would have the same, be operating under the same requirements as the Illinois law on an Illinois bid. The non-resident bidder is responsible for specifying whether or not there's a preference law in effect in Iowa at the time of the bid under the Iowa code. In Iowa, responsible bidder ordinances are not as common because there is Iowa Code Section 26, which prohibits pre-qualification projects or pre-qualification requirements on a contract for public improvements. This includes any type of pre-qualification related to the bidder's experience on similar project, a union affiliation, the size of the company, or the statute says any other criteria. So what we see instead in Iowa is public bodies defining what it means to be a responsible bidder in some of that broad language that we see already in municipal codes and state statute, in focusing on insurances that the contractor provides training or provides safety training specific with OSHA, as well as the contractor's quality of performance on past projects, and that the contractor has sufficient financial resources to perform the work. And there's examples of ordinances on our website for Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa to get some examples of language and seeing what public bodies have passed. You can go to our website, click on resources, and then select ordinances. If you have questions, I know we're running a little short on time. We're happy to stick around to answer some of those questions. Please feel free to reach out to me. And if you're interested in a responsible bidder ordinance or responsible business practice ordinance for your community, please reach out to Mike Lingle, our field operations coordinator, and he can put you in touch with the person in your community, county, town, that would be able to provide assistance and examples of responsible bidder language. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa, Frank Manzo, and Frank Lucchese for your wonderful presentations. We will move on to the Q&A. There were some questions that it looked like Frank already responded to one of them about a template of an RBO in Indiana towns. Yes, FFC on our website, we do have a model RBO. I can also email that out to every participant, but Frank sent a link there, so thank you very much.
It was while Melissa was talking, I'm referring to it, so
Yeah.
referring to those. So I was like, I might as well answer this one.
Yeah, and then he also answered a question about the solar project in Indiana, that video that Frank Lucchese showed. That was a 700 megawatt solar utility scale project in Jasper and Stark counties in Indiana. And the reason we specifically highlighted that project was because it did hire local workers. We've been tracking solar projects at FFC, and a lot of solar projects have been bid out to contractors and workers that are out of state, from Texas or Missouri or Kentucky. And so that was a great project to highlight about local workers and the impact it had on the local economy and the community.
I'm happy to answer the last one, Jill.
Which of that one? What about union selling? Is that what
No,
you're
the last question. There's one question on the bottom. One question is just, don't some of these laws drive up the cost of projects to the taxpayer? I mentioned 3 public policies. One was prevailing wage laws. There's a bunch of research that's been peer reviewed, published in academic journals, all this kind of technical jargon since 2000 on prevailing wage standards, about 30 studies. 90% of those studies find that prevailing wage laws have no effect on the costs of public projects for traditional projects, roads, bridges, schools, public buildings, things like that. The reason primarily is that they has no effect on the number of bidders, and these construction is a very low labor costs are very low share of the total costs on these projects. Usually around 20 to 30% of total costs. So even if you do have a slight increase in wages, it doesn't have a massive effect on the total costs. Like say you have a 10% increase in wages, 10% times 20% on the labor costs, that would be 2% differential. But that doesn't then take into account the fact that those workers might be better trained. We talked about apprenticeship training. They're more productive. They have lower turnover rates. All these things down the line. They might be better, make better use of materials usage. So, anyways, the research is very clear on that. It's actually been most economists agree it's pretty much settled on that front. Same thing on responsible bidder ordinances. The kind of growing body of research there is that there's no net effect on project costs there. And as I mentioned, the reason is pretty similar. Not a huge amount of labor costs are the same, but there's been the data has kind of shown an increase in the number of bidders. And the reason there's increase in the number of bidders is that the local contractors are looking at those RBOs and saying, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about someone coming in from out of town undercutting it. Like if they have to worry about that, they're like, I'm not going to bid on this. Someone who's misclassifying their workers or bringing in undocumented workers and not paying them under the table in cash is going to underbid me by 10%, 20%, and I'm not going to be able to win. So I'm just not even going to bid. When there's an RBO, they say, oh yeah, I'm for sure. I'm putting my hand up. I'm gonna try on this. And so we actually see an increase in the number of bidders, and more bidders drives down costs, and it ends up being no net change. So those two policies we see no impact on costs. And then the final one, local bidder preference. Local business preference programs or bid credits. Technically, those we don't have any real research. You might see a very small increase in costs, but the idea of those is to offset it with all the value that's provided by keeping the dollars local. So you might pay 1%, 2%, 3% more on the project. You're still paying the $100,000 instead of $99,000, but all of that money is staying locally in your economy instead of going to Alabama, Texas, somewhere else, right? So you're actually, instead of losing, thousands of dollars to other states and losing all the apprenticeship training money, it's staying local. So the argument is that the investment locally is much greater. The investment of that $1,000 is greater than the loss. And so that's the kind of thought of those three policies. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Either Frank, Manzo, or Melissa, if you would want to answer this question, is hiring a local workforce the same thing as responsible bidding?
I think that's kind of what we're talking about broadly today in terms of how the responsible bidder ordinance can promote hiring a local workforce without the specific residency requirement or bid credits that are we see sometimes in preference laws. One other thing, if I can respond, I noticed there's a question about examples of bid language for bid credits. We don't have anything right now, but I can mention that the city of Rockford has a local preference ordinance with a 5% or $20,000 rebate, whichever is less, on residents of Winnebago, Ogle, Boone, or Stevenson County. The Elgin Municipal Code, I believe it's at 5.08.170, has a bid. This is actually a resident requirement for Elgin residents. And then Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Municipal Code Section 17-109 has a preference for local business entities. So a couple examples that might be helpful in looking at language. And actually on our website, Clinton County has a local source price language. If the local source price is within 2.5%, the local source will be favored. And that's the city of Clinton.
And that's in Iowa.
That language.
Yeah, all of this applies to all projects, right? There was a question about solar. It applies to all energy projects, all public projects, right? It could be anything that's being built. If something's going to be built in an area, and broadly, as long as it's being built, you want it to be built locally. It's kind of the same argument we're having nationally about, do we want jobs to be shipped over to China, or do we want them here in the United States? I mean, it's a variant of that argument. Obviously, it's much more localized, but broadly, if things are being built, you want them built locally for all the reasons we've discussed.
There are some additional protections local agencies or municipalities can apply to RBOs to protect against fraud, like companies that use local PO box addresses or have employees live in an employer's rental property, etc.
That's tough, right? The very specific examples, I think, following up with the contractor for additional documentation or clarification if there is a concern, is something that you could do. I don't have specific examples off the top of my head to respond to that.
Yeah, that one is tougher because usually the answer for that is it needs to be done federally or state. To handle fraud, it's like a state attorney general or broadly, right? Those are who tend to handle those cases.
Perfect. Keep asking us questions if you have more. There's just one final one that we have right now that just asks if your council expects the lowest bid to be accepted, like what do you do, no matter if it's local or not?
This goes back to the issue of, just discretion in determining what the lowest responsible bidder is. And if there are concerns that a low bidder is not responsible, reminding them sometimes of some of the examples we saw in the complaints that Frank Lucchese had in terms of, the risk that if there's red flags, does the contractor have the equipment to get and the staffing to perform the job on time? Examples from other places where there were liquidated damages assessed because the contractor was behind schedule or change orders were submitted. So that's really where your references can come into play in determining whether or not, there are concerns or if the contractor has the responsibility to do the work.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you to our great speakers. I will send an email later on today with a recording of this video as well as all of our contact info. So if questions arise later, please shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to be, available to help answer any questions you have. And we just want to thank you again for joining. So everyone have a great day and we'll see you sometime soon, hopefully.